you are talking about policy reformation, you need to understand how the sector that represents the low-income people thinks. It's not like it's not all about let's privatize and make money and forget about Tito. So John, with his organization ZimCode, they spent a lot of time investing in interrogating policies, the debt situation, debt overhang. How do these things influence the economic parameters of our country? So we thought that it was going to be important to have him as well as our panelists. We also have Mrs. Rosalind Charewa, Aunt Charewa or Charewa, with an HWA, right? So Rosalind is one of the few ladies that I know who has been able to sustain business under these very difficult circumstances. So when she speaks, we assume that she represents a constituency not just of business, but also of women entrepreneurs. It's a very small clique of very brave women up there. Wana Rose Mchawera, Wana Divine Lugula, Wana Rose Peters. It's an interesting group. And when I was doing some work with ZNCC, Rose and their friends managed to persuade me to sit in their committee. They've got what they call the women's desk that focuses on the interests of business women. I don't know, maybe my name sounded a bit funny, but I took up the responsibility. So that's when I met Rose. She runs a very successful company. She's an intellectual, she's an academic. The last time that I saw her, she was trying to do a PhD and doing school runs at the same time. I don't know whether she managed to do that. Yeah. Jablani is a young man of real serious innovation. You heard him talking about blockchain. At COMALISO, we enjoy his presence because whenever there is a new innovation, whether it is DeepSeek or chatbot, whatever, he is always the first person to say, guys, there is trouble coming our way. Let's look at different opportunities. So there's a brilliant opportunity that we are looking at, because think tanks are not just about promoting entrepreneurship. We also we are supposed to be creating products. So there's a brilliant product that we have created, which we are going to be talking about in the next coming few months, if God willing. And of course, Tonderai, our young man as well, is a very good writer. He's been trying to get 1 or 2 scholarships to go and do his master's somewhere. And I'm like, Timbo Miracle and Amfana, Timbo Gazisanyika. Murugenda Kupuko Fana. So it's important that we also promote young people because we always hear about the new generation. The other generation wants to be there for some time, but we won't stop preparing the new generation because the old generation wants to be there. The issue of pricing and regulation seems to be something that the IPPs have been making noise about. We have had a lot of discussions, Honorable, about assuming that the entire value chain was privatized. What happens to the price? But that's the same question that we were asking when the fuel supply and distribution was deregulated. And nobody seems to be too worried. I mean, once in a while, ZESA publishes on their website certain, price, limitation and all that. But that has not influenced supply. So there are certain dynamics that perhaps we might need to consider, as Gloria says, when we do our blueprint. Anyway, Rose, your turn.
Thank you very much, Rejoice, and thank you for having me. I wondered when you invited me what my role was. So I kept asking Rejoice, send me the initial invitation. I thought maybe I would read something from there between the lines. So I'm a local entrepreneur and I'm what you call a serial entrepreneur. I'm an opportunist. Once I see something, I go for it and I take no prisoners. The privatization of ZESA, I'm sorry to say, I'm going to talk about stuff that may not agree with what we've been talking about here. And I'm talking from a standpoint of being in the field and knowing exactly what us as entrepreneurs need. And privatization of ZESA kind of ignores systematic lessons from Africa's energy sector and risks deepening inequality. Zimbabwe needs reforms, not ownership change. I like the attitude that we all have. We all know that Zambia is suffering from the same pandemic. We all know that South Africa also has blackouts, but we are courageous enough to look into our own issues as Zimbabwe and say, what can we do to improve efficiencies? So a case study of ESCOM in South Africa, it looks like it was a it is a state-owned utility faced collapse due to corruption, mismanagement, and has a $23 billion debt. Partial privatization led to tariff hikes of about 300% since 2007. So that means that, you know, ESCOM ended up increasing tariffs and ended up hurting the SME sector. I come from that sector and I know what a very high electricity bill will do to your bottom line. And I also know about stolen cables and replacing them after ZESA says they don't have the capacity to replace. And you wonder, these stolen cables are always stolen during a power cut, which means whoever is stealing probably is inside ZESA or somewhere there. So that's where I'm coming from when I say corruption at that level. If we can just look at it from that level and try to find ways to follow our employees to say who is stealing what. Rural neglect and inequality. I am a Musarurwa, which means I was born Musarurwa and then married to a Charewa. In my rural area, there's a Winyani River. And my folk out there, Kumusha, in trying to empower themselves, came up with an irrigation scheme. It's called Musarurwa Irrigation Scheme. And the only issue that deters them from producing from their land is lack of electricity. One time you find them not having a transformer. The next time ZESA people have come to sort out some stuff, and then we stay 3 years without being active because ZESA has not replaced infrastructure. So I also thought, you know, why should we privatize an organization like ZESA? And yet we have organizations like Tel One. Sorry to put out names, but women are not spoken of very oftenly. So I'm going to put out a name here, Rejoice. When Chipo Mtasa was running Tel One, we all saw what she did. And we all saw how she put Tel One on the map. And we all saw how the other players within the telecoms sector were running around, were given a run for their money, and yet they were private. And this was a state-run institution like Tel One. And I wonder what it is that Chipo Mtasa did that these other people cannot do. And they have the same government at the helm. Chipo reported to the same people. I'm very fortunate to have been, my job is to clean. I'm into hygienic services and products. I was right there when she was going up and down the stairs. I was right there doing our ISO certification. Yes, cleaners do have excellence to do their job. So I was right there and I wondered, what is it this woman does? She was doing her job, period. She just did her job. So why can't we do the same as ZESA? Why can't we employ the same? And I will talk about Zambia. I will talk about, I think it's Zambia that I wanted to talk about, but due to time, I will not dwell much on it. They tried to privatize, and of course, as usual, they failed. So privatization, I don't think the question is on privatization. I'm sorry to pour water on Rejoice's project, but then I don't think the case is on privatization. It's about excellence. It's about leadership. It's about thwarting corruption. It's about putting an able leader at the helm and making sure that they run with it. So I would like to give one of my colleagues here an opportunity to intervene. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for joining us today at the Power to People Forum. Let me start by looking at the current state of our electricity in Zimbabwe. There is power deficit. Power generation per day in Zimbabwe is 866 megawatts, of which Zimbabwe needs around 2,400 megawatts per day. So imagine all industries are going like 16 hours average per day without electricity. So how can we enhance growth and development if we are going for 2/3 of a day without electricity? So I believe the call for privatization of ZESA so that we can increase competence and excellence is vital. That's why we are here at this forum with COMALISO. Let's look at the sources of electricity. We have Wange Thermal Power Station, Kariba Hydro Power Station, and other independent power stations like Mnyati. All these power stations, some of them are state-owned, and they are failing to meet the demand of electricity needed. So the privatization of ZESA, I'm sorry to disagree with my fellow panelists. The privatization of ZESA is an agent call in Zimbabwe. Let me look along the discussion. There were challenges which were raised pertaining what the hindrance to the service delivery, pertaining power supply value chain. There's a regulatory framework which have gray areas. The affordability, yes, we can afford it, but there are challenges. My point is on past failures. We are failing to do a post-mortem to see the past failures which affected our power supply in Zimbabwe. For instance, I will put some names here. Around 2008, 2009, during the inclusive government, Engineer Mzuri was the Minister of Energy. He later resigned, and Engineer Elton Mangoma was assigned as well. They didn't do a post-mortem why Engineer Mzuri willingly resigned, but they just reappointed someone. So there are some past challenges which must be looked into and do a post-mortem so that we have excellence in our power service delivery in Zimbabwe. Examples where privatization excel. Here in Africa, we have Kenya. Kenya under Moi and Kibaki, they pursued liberalization rather than full privatization, but it showed positive outcomes around that year. The introduction of independent power producers was enacted and launched by Kibaki and Ken Jane. So there was a liberalization of power in Kenya. And right now, as we speak, 80% of Kenyans have access to electricity 24/7. So the notion of privatization of ZESA is an agent call to ease the power deficit in Zimbabwe. Then in Uganda, in 1999, the Museveni administration launched the privatization of Ugandan electricity, and it was good by that time. But as time progresses, I don't know whether it's bureaucratic nonsense or stupidity. Then India privatized as well. You can search about it. Eastern Europe, Bulgaria and Romania, they in fact switched other generators because there was excess power after they privatized. So I can think I can end there for now. So privatization of ZESA should be backed by any means necessary. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Good morning once again, everyone. 8 November 2024, News Day, Zimbabwe. ZESA reels under 430 million United States dollars debt. Right? Then 20 March 2024, we are struggling to clear debts, says ZESA. That's the Zimbabwe Independent. The Herald of the same month, ZESA set to clear 76 million US debt. Then 6 August, I can go on and on. But I want to start off at a point of agreement with the first panelist here, who clearly states that I think while its privatization has worked in other contexts, privatization of ZESA is an agenda that really needs a thorough introspection of our context, different demographic dynamics that we have in Zimbabwe, issues of inequality, issues of levels of income, and so forth. I also need to highlight that the privatization of the energy sector, for me, I think it sort of ignores that electricity is a public good. That is a starting point for me. It is a public good, and we need not, privatize it. I want to agree once again that it's not about the change of ownership, but change of governance systems. How are our institutions run? How are they led? How are they operated? Because at this pace, we are likely then going to have, at the end of the day, we'll privatize our parliament. We will end up talking about privatizing our ZPC. We are going to end up privatizing, I hope not, our cabinet and government. We just need to change the way we run our systems. We need a change of culture, adopt a culture of responsibility, adopt a culture of, excellence. By responsibility, we need to own up. And if we look thoroughly, why does ZESA have so much debt? And why is ZESA struggling. Before we talk about privatizing it, what are the deep-seated issues within ZESA? I'm glad that we have got colleagues here that are from the energy sector, and they can assist. But the little that I know, number one, it's struggling because of unpaid debts. Users are not owning up. They use free energy. And then the company is not a running concern. It's it becomes a loss-making company on an annual basis. We have local authorities not owning up to the power they use. We have got farms belonging to people that are politically exposed, powerful enough, and I'm sure some of them you cannot cut off them from the grid because of who they are. We have individuals that continue to use power and they don't pay. So in that regard, we need to see where the problem is before we talk about changing of ownership or privatizing it. That's the one side of the coin for me. The second thing is that I think privatization of ZESA will just increase deep-seated and wide inequalities that we have in Zimbabwe. So for me, a privately run power generation and distribution of electricity, it's going to, if I were a private company running such a business, I'll do a market study. I'll concentrate where there is high demand. That's where I would prefer to supply and sell my product, isn't it? What happens to the rural areas? You've got households that are spaced some 2 kilometers, 3 kilometers apart. Power distribution in those areas becomes very expensive. You cannot run it profitably as a private entity. So in the end, you have those areas neglected. This is why power generation and power distribution for me should remain a public service. And why are we, why should we be apologetic to allow the government to shed off this responsibility? They have a mandate to collect taxes from all of us, and we must all pay taxes responsibly. And the government's duty, from a tax justice perspective, is to redistribute those resources, ensuring that there is equity, there is equal access of basic commodities, basic needs. I would say the same about privatization of Zupco, because in the end, it's those that have, those that can access, they will live a better life. The quality of life for those that are poor, those that have little access to means of resources, they will live a miserable life in this country. And we are saying, what is the mantra? Leaving no one behind. All the developmental agendas that we have subscribed to, they do not speak to this idea of privatization of public goods. Agenda 2063, Agenda 2030, the NDS1. All of these, they are not achievable if we are to go by this route, in my view. So, I believe that we cannot sit here and agree to promote energy poverty. We cannot sit here and agree to say that, and I want to agree with Rudo's presentation. She properly dissected to say, when we are saying privatization of ZESA, what components are we talking about? Is it the generation? Is it the redistribution or distribution? Is it the retail? I think retail has already been diversified, privatized. Anyone can sell electricity. But regards distribution, I think we still need to leave that responsibility with the authorities that we elected and gave mandate to ensure that there is equitable access to means of resources so that everyone has a good quality of life. What about the issue of employment? The idea of privatization is also promoted around the issues of increasing employment, but I beg to differ. I actually think that in this generation, in 2025, profit-led companies, and I'm not saying that ZESA should not have a profit kind of vision, but it should be a going concern with equity issues in its vision. However, there is a risk of massive job losses. In this generation of artificial intelligence, robotics, technology, computerization, job losses are imminent the moment you privatize some of these entities, in my view. And it just worsens the quality of life for people. And the idea as well of privatizing such strategic entities, for me, I think it presents a risk of natural monopolies. What happens, imagine a scenario of a foreign-owned company that comes in and buys your power utility company, 100% ownership, and energy is strategic. And one day they can decide to switch off the grid. It's not only strategic, it's even a security issue. It's a livelihood issue. You have your hospitals, water supply, relying on all those things. So I think it's a very risky issue to even go that direction. The second issue as well is the alignment of national interests. You cannot leave such strategic industries in the hands, entirely in the hands of the private sector without a degree of control. Because as a private entity, I would prioritize profit rather than your national strategic interests. The national vision is to ensure that we achieve an upper middle income economy, but that's not the vision of a private commercial player. Their vision is to maximize profits at all costs. And therefore, the idea of neglecting certain areas and so forth, infrastructure development and so forth, supply of electricity. ZESA can supply electricity at equilibrium, but not a private company. And therefore, I'm simply saying that privatization of electricity generation, electricity supply is not a good idea at all, due to these issues that I've highlighted. Issues of affordability, equity concerns, and high risk of energy poverty, and many other issues that I've highlighted. I'm glad we've had many case studies already. But even locally, we should even be able to look behind and say, how was the privatization of the Dairy Board Zimbabwe Limited? It was called DMB, the privatization of CMB. How have those parastatals privatization, turned out? With what results? What have been the challenges? What have been the successes? How has issues of equity? I come from a cotton growing rural area, Gokwe, and I can spend a day telling you about how that transformed the lives of the ordinary poor. We lived on cotton growing in our community. But the moment Kotko was privatized, I think it changed the whole narrative. Today, it's even a different story. So I don't even want to go about that. So I do think that there are strategic industries that we need to ensure that they still receive their mandate, their oversight from public institutions like Parliament. There was a question around who oversees and where does ZERA report to, where does EMA report to. We have oversight institutions, our Parliament, for example. They should continue to do that. The Office of the Auditor General is also responsible for that, to ensure that there is transparency and accountability in these institutions. I'll rest here and hand over the mic. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will pick it over from there. But for me, my point is government has only two roles in an economy. That is protecting life and property, nothing else. ZESA should be privatized in its totality and entirety. Why do I say so? Privatization is feared because our education system, which the government made to create obedient followers and taxpayers, he has always emphasized the Keynesian view of economics, which has brought a demarcation of goods, public and private, which is not an economic concept. What it has done, from crash, kids are told, What do we need a government for? It's a song. We need a government so that it can provide us bridges, roads, and things the private sector cannot do. So you grew up on this opium. So you are blinded. Right now, if I tell you the Keynesian School of Economics doesn't have a capital theory, go to any bookshop right now, pick a mainstream economics textbook. It would have less than 4 pages on entrepreneurship. It's by design. I will go on further to explain why privatization is good. Privatization is feared because of the myth and what I've said, that the establishment always makes it clear that you don't get full information. Privatization is about information. Right now, 40% of the debt or inefficiency ZESA, ZINWA, or any government-owned parastatal is due to information asymmetry. Because by design, a government organization run or led is built with inbuilt inefficiency. Privatization speaks to profit and loss, not as greed or self-interest, but profit and loss allows for entrepreneurs, managers, and anyone in charge of a resource to get information. In an economy, there are over 3 million prices which are acting against each other. They all condense as interest rates. Zimbabwe is one of the highest interest rates, which is something that a government-owned organization cannot manage. That is why a lot of blueprints die at the hands of bureaucracy, government, or a hue of regulatory compliances. Even if we were to look at our regulations, most of them are not even to improve efficiency or anything. They are just to make sure that a certain office that is filled with people gets its salaries and pays at the end of the month. They are not in any way linked to the actual generation, distribution, or provision of electricity. Privatization is the only ethical thing to do than to continue to hide behind the banner of that the government can best take care of energy because it's a strategic resource and whatnot, when we have seen that the base of our economic instability has always been due to energy inefficiency. For example, last year as I was reading in IH Securities report, all our miners lost 500 million USD due to periods they didn't have electricity. Ungi miner lost. Their production went down by 2% because they had periods of load shedding. Something that can never happen under a free market profit and loss systems. Can Econet wake up today and say, Chitungwiza, you are not going to have electricity, you are not going to have access to our network for the next 2 months. We have a backlog of boosters, engineers, and stuff like that. No, that is impossible. As much as people would want to paint a scary picture of the private sector, but it's only ZINWA, Sito Ferrari, or ZESA that can make a city go for a year without power or anything. Because government, there is no incentive to do good, to improve, or to do anything. Right now we have over-reliance on thermal, which has a lot of antique equipment. Then we also have another reliance on hydro, which is not sustainable with the droughts, climate change, and also the debt of expanding those things. So I believe that the only way to bring new solutions, new perspective, is through a privatization of ZESA and ensure its supply chain. I tell you right now, if we were to get a head count of ZESA, it will be over 1,000. All the engineers, stuff like that, and a lot of managers paid not to do much. But a private organization with 50 people can manage ZESA effectively with low losses and low inefficiency. All the things and the funding gap we are talking about, they are because right now, if our government is to approach any organization that can give them loans, they have a hill to climb first of the legacy external debt. No one is going to pour more than $1 billion in Zimbabwe. The same as the keynote speaker who presented first there, that there are a lot of NGOs who are not doing anything in energy. It goes back to sovereignty, risky debt, and our structure of our regulatory system. Energy demands a lot of financial resources. All of the projects of energy, they need economies of scale. There's no way Danida or any small organization is going to come here and do anything in energy. That's why they leave it. On economics case, they will say that we would have done so and so if it was in the private hands, because they would give us an Excel sheet of the right prediction, right information, and someone guided by profit and loss is bound to stop when things go wrong. Than for ZESA, which will just know that you'll be taxed your 15%, your whatever tax, until you cannot pay those taxes. Privatization is good. It allows for entrepreneurship to find ways to be part of the wagon. As I'm saying right now, that the current setup on itself is a jura war or a precast war to capital, because our government, its debt structure, or whatnot, or its monetary policy. But whatever the inflation or whatever environment, IPPEs are doing well. The past 2 years, I used to track IPPE's power generation daily. There was at some point when it was 6 megawatt. Inflation got worse, interest rates got worse, everything got worse. But IPPEs are now at 65%. ZESA is going down with all the tax monies and all the justifications you have. ZESA is becoming worse and worse while getting more and more money, resources, and focus. Why don't we try the alternative than shooting it down before we try it? Of course, full privatization might scare us because we have not been there, or we have seen the wrong which have been done on ISAP and indigenization. So I will say that the road to privatization does not need to be overnight or a hard reset, but we can start with commercialization, deregulation, research. We have over 16 universities, over 6 polytechnics, I don't know how many vocational centers and stuff. All those are training people to go to UK, go to Australia, to make energy better there. I personally know more than 20 engineers doing well in Australia, in New Zealand, in South Africa, in Namibia, in UK. They didn't live here because they had no ideas or ways to make things better. But the setup of a system that rewards incompetence, that rewards status quo bias and inertia. We are a country that has, over the years, felt safe in staying in the mud as long as we don't change. Like, we fear change. We'd rather stay in the dark than see the light. So, from a philosophical, economic, and business point of view, I think it's high time we start to look at ideas that contradict our status quo and open new doors to ideas, to competencies, and to allow the young people and entrepreneurs in this nation to solve our problems. We have a double problem that our economy is in distress, and our energy sector, which drives the economy and all prices, is also in distress. So why continue to entrust the same sector to a government that is under the burden of debt, under the burden of political maladministration and so forth? Let's give the private sector a chance. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Jabu. Ladies and gentlemen, we hear stories on both sides. The arguments are very compelling, and But obviously, you also have an opinion because, like Gloria says, when you build a blueprint story, you need to have compelling evidence. I don't know how many of you have ever sat in a parliamentary committee arguing a case of legal reforms. We always talk about it, Parliament is dysfunctional, this and that. But I think take time to sit in Parliament to try and persuade legislators to change the law. You are forced to dig deep into your resources in terms of your knowledge and understanding of issues. And I think this argument here, Jabu, Tonde, guys, we're gonna have to work a bit hard because our own passion and conviction might not be enough to eliminate the elephant in the room. But at the end of the day, we mean good, Mashikada, we mean good. There are entities that would be interested in doing things wrong, profit maximization, not going to do Tito to do this and that. But at the end of the day, we are saying, how is it possible for Zimbabwe to drive itself into the era of industrialization? Our industry, Callisto, is operating probably at about 36% capacity. But at the end of the day, we want our young people to be employed in this country by a functional industry. John, yes, we need to be sensitive to inequalities, to differentiations in terms of quality of life and affordability. But it's okay to be equal, but we don't want to be equal in the dark. In light. Can we summarize, Rose?
Thank you very much, Rejoice. I think you have just begun to make sense to me, Rejoice.
Oh, really? So all along I've been...
it didn't make sense to me. Why would you want to sell a private entity, a public entity, and make it a private one? I loved the fact that you are now looking at the telecommunications framework. That framework really is working. If at all we are going to look at anything that has worked. You brought in a new player, is it Starlink?
Yeah.
The Elon Musk one. And we were all jittery, me included. And because I'm a subscriber to Tel One for my Wi-Fi, I thought by the second month or third month, I would have moved to Starlink. But I'm still with Tel One to
because
this
Tel
day.
One improved their services.
Yes.
We're in the same neighborhood, remember?
I'm still with them because Elon Musk does have his own problems. So when looking at that framework, that the telecommunications framework that the politicians or the government came up with, I think it is currently working and we could always replicate it. When I prepared my presentation, I didn't think of that telecommunications framework. I was thinking of privatization versus leaving it being run by the government. So I had alternatives whereby I thought, we could always fix the leadership and not ownership. I also now am kind of agreeing with, is it Dr. Madzikanda? Mr. Madzikanda. Yes, Mr. Madzikanda, because all along, of course, I'm on his side. I'm against privatization. But at the same time, he was explaining too much for me to be convinced that he's offering any or proffering any solutions. But I think now, he's now making sense because there is this alternative that we all know works. And if we appoint skilled, accountable leaders, we need skilled and accountable leaders to overhaul ZESA, Dr. Madzikanda. If you're not a doctor, just go for it. And we need ZESA to partner with AU or SADC for governance training and debt restructuring. He keeps talking about legacy, this legacy, that legacy, this. But you keep collecting money from us every month, and sometimes we prepay. And I think Rejoice and I stay in the same neighborhood. We have figured that ZESA keeps taking, even if there is no electricity, it is charging still. And SME-centric renewable energy, to offer SMEs to our politicians, offer SMEs tax breaks, you know, in order for them to be encouraged to adopt things like solar energy, all renewable energy, and ZESA to buy excess power from them and pay in real money. You also don't want this money that you're offering us, so we wouldn't want it as well. And regional power pooling, we already have the Kariba power station, whereby we're doing this collaboration with Zambia. I think we can do the same with Mozambique over gas, and I'm sure it will work. To government, I say audit ZESA. Yes, audit ZESA. And audit ZESA leadership and adopt the TEL 1 anti-corruption playbook. And legislate rural electrification targets to protect SMEs. I know there's a REA. I don't know if it's still working. Yes. Form coalitions and demand energy reforms. My closing statement is ESCOM's spectacular collapse and TEL 1, I'm just comparing the incomparable, and TEL 1's revival teach us one lesson, that leadership and not ownership determines success. Let's reform ZESA, empower SMEs, and keep Zimbabwe's lights on for everyone. And let's not leave anyone behind. I thank you.
It's my prayer that ZESA must be privatized 100%. We differ, I know. Yes. Because of its inefficiencies. No one is interested to partner with ZESA, especially with the outcome of corruption within ZESA right now. No one is interested. For instance, years back, the RBZ formulated the ZANGO, Zimbabwe Asset Management Company, which was responsible for clearing debts for parastatals, including ZESA and Air Zimbabwe. Let me talk about Air Zimbabwe for ZESA. I'm not talking about it. Air Zimbabwe, there was a debt of 200 million when ZAMCO was formulated. Then 3 years back, that debt was cleared, but 3 years later, Air Zimbabwe had a debt of 300 million again. Same situation applies to ZESA. As you see, he was reading headline, they are failing to pay their debts. So privatize ZESA and leave the debt to the government so that we can have something tangible. Who is interested right now to partner with ZESA and pour his money with the glitches of corruption we read, we see every day? So it's my prayer, ZESA must be privatized so that the debt which they are failing to pay can left to the government. The government, we already have a big debt, so it's not an issue. Let's privatize this. I thank you.
All right. In summation and conclusion, I will say that a plethora of points, ideas, overviews have been shared and concerns like that. And I will stick to my view that nothing takes care of the poor and the vulnerable like a free market. As much as we would want the government, because of the facade of the constitution or the rhetoric that politicians say, they do not walk the talk. So I am for privatization, but with a smooth route of commercialization, is what was done after PTC was disbanded into Zimpost, Net 1 and TEL 1. We can start with commercialization, deregulation, and something like that. The same has happened in telecoms and the industry. And we can all now tell how good CityLink is, how efficient it, all the other private players, combis, and the new entrants of InDrive and something like that. I'm sure we have seen how competition from Starlink has made both the private and public sector to be on their toes, to innovate, to lower their fuel usage and offer a better price, better efficiency and quality. The same can also happen with energy. There's nothing too big or too small that the free market or demand and supply or profit and loss signals cannot solve. Our major problem in this economy, of course, we need strong institutions, governance, dealing with corruption and proper leaders and staff. But we will go back to the basic economic problem of scarcity that government cannot answer in the optimum time and at optimum use of resources. Government or whatever it is will never be efficient at answering the simple questions of what, when, for whom, and why to produce. The same thing happens with all the information and resource allocation. Government is inefficient because no one really gets fired for not doing the right thing. Of course, people can do the right thing in government and stuff, but effectiveness is absent. There's no incentive to go further, to do the right thing the right way. So I believe all the ideas will help us come with a better framework that allows more funding to come in, and of course to address the root causes like tax, regulation, and the issue of our currency, which at the root would need maybe something outside the energy sector like a new RBZ Act, because the RBZ Act has been the source of the malady of the currency due to the overdraft they offer government. So it's like trying to cure a drunkard with more beer, like the RBZ guarantees to take debts of government, it guarantees to continue offering them an overdraft and easy money. So let's also look around those structural issues and create an enabling environment that fosters innovation, competition, lower prices, quality, and inclusion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rejoice, and for the generous space. I want to thank everyone for the different views that are coming through on this conversation. And I also want to say that in fact I have a question which we can continue to talk about whether there is anything really stopping private players from participating in the energy generation and distribution now. While lists, we have our ZESA remaining with its mandate, properly run, efficiently run, institutional reforms, particularly improving on checks and balances, issues of transparency and accountability to ensure social equity, social justice, and the like. That's my submission. That we cannot continue to look at privatization as the cure in all industries, in all lines of work. There are areas in the economy where we can talk about privatization with the limited or minimum harm on the generality of citizens, but we need to be deliberate about identifying key sectors that have a significant harm on the livelihoods of all citizens. I like that my colleague seated with me here mentioned that the duty of government is to protect. I think it's part of protection. Protection is not only with guns and other ammunitions. When you talk about food security, protection of life and quality of life, the mandate broadens to that extent to ensure that you protect your citizens from the excesses of poverty, the excesses of capital, greed, profiteering. Government has a mandate to protect its citizens across that whole broad chain. So that's me signing off, and thank you once again.
Thank you very much, John. Of course, your submission is that the Honourable Member of Parliament will say to me, what is it that is stopping the private participation in the current scenario? And we need to have an answer to that. Thank you very much, Jabo. And in summarizing, Gloria looks at privatization as a kind of a hybrid, like what David is saying, that really, when we approach Parliament and stakeholders, we need to have clarity on the objectives. Why? Answering the questions, the elephant in the room in terms of deficiencies, inequalities, competitiveness, the social protection structure, and of course, being very articulate, honorable, in terms of the empirical evidence on, COTCO or Dairy Board, Tail 1 and so forth. So that we need to be very clear. Our objectives are going to be very clear. Now, obviously, we then fall back into the second aspect of the blueprint of the regulatory framework. What is it about ZERA that we believe can substantiate and leverage the issue of the tariff not being a barrier to entry of the private participation, so that we are going to have to look at that. And of course, the process itself, there are major fears about transparency, Honorable, that you are taking a public property and giving it to Mbinga. And we need to be very careful in our model. We need to be very clear. How do we immunize Mashakada? How do we immunize the transition from public ownership to private ownership or participation from predatory elements, like what she puts it across? And if we cannot satisfy ourselves, gentlemen, it might be difficult to satisfy Mount Hamden. But of course, we have always insisted also that integrating renewable energy as a whole cycle. We have talked about things like completely removing duties and excise tariffs on solar products for a moratorium for about 5 or so years, so that each and every home has affordable solar. We then take away the responsibility of HEP and focus it on mines and commerce rather than in domestic consumption. That's another thing that we're going to, of course, issues of financing and investment. It's huge investment. We are going to look at that in the blueprint. Community engagement and social responsibility. Gentlemen, we need to go to the community and say, what do you think? If they don't understand what privatization and participation is, Rose, it is our responsibility as a think tank to explain to them. Because they enjoy the benefits. We used to spend 6 hours, Honorable, waiting at a queue for petrol station in Rua with Rose. But a stroke of genius, you remember the statement, changed the whole thing because of participation of the private sector. So the participation of private sector is not an illusion. Its benefits are real, and they benefit everybody. The regulation of ZUPCO and so forth. And of course, the challenges that are inherent in the processes and how we will mitigate the risk. So all these, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to be able to take your input, factor it in, and before my team and I drive to Mount Hamden, definitely we will have gotten back to you to say, is this the way that you feel we should be? Because our objectives, we mean well. We are not being driven by predatory profiteering. We only want the best for this country. We want our industry to start off functioning. We want our mines to start functioning, and we want to minimize the losses that we have incurred because of the energy deficit. With those few words, I really would like to thank you.